Throughout this whole course, we've talked about some debugging techniques that you can use when developing plugins and themes. For example, using the developer tools or dumping out data or just searching through the code to understand how it works. We've also turned on debug mode inside the WordPress config file. There are hundreds of debugging tools available and a lot of it tends to be preference. Some tools require that you make some modifications and others are just plug and play. In this lecture, we're going to explore certain techniques and tools that can be useful for plugin and theme development. One thing you may have noticed is that WordPress heavily relies on hooks. It's how you get anything done in WordPress. The hook system is extremely old. It's been around for over a decade now. Since its inception, it has grown to contain more information than most people would assume. Open the index template. Add some PHP tags anywhere in the template. It doesn't matter. All action and filter hooks that have been registered are stored in a global variable called WP filter. I'm going to dump out the contents of this array and format the results a bit. Refresh the home page. You'll notice the page may take a little longer than usual to load. There's a good reason for this. Once your page is finished loading, you'll have this big array being loaded with nested objects and arrays. Some of these hooks belong to you, others to other plugins, and the rest belonging to the WordPress core itself. As you can see, a lot takes place behind the scenes. There is a lot of information here, so let's just take a look at one hook. Go back to the index template. We're going to modify this dump by checking out a certain hook called WP_footer. We haven't used this action hook before, but it's called when the footer of our site is loaded. Refresh the page and you should see all the functions and data related to this hook. This is a great way to debug your code. I find myself doing this for one of two reasons. I like to check if my registered hooks are being registered. I can even check the priority and determine a good priority without having to guess. Another use is to check what functions are running from other plugins. A really good example would be when we were discussing how WooCommerce works. If you can recall, we would go through the template files and read any do action functions and read the comments above. Even though WooCommerce provided that useful information, not all plugins do that. Luckily, if you have an editor like Visual Studio Code, you can find functions pretty fast. However, if you don't have Visual Studio Code, then the next best thing to do would be to echo out the contents of the WP filter variable and check out what functions are being called along with their priority. You could then remove it and even replace them afterwards. Before we move further, you should know that you can dump out the contents of an object or an array by also using the function printr. The difference between printr and var dump functions is that the var dump function will usually output a little more information. However, this can be hard to read, especially if you're a beginner. The printr function will output a decent amount of information and it's more readable. In the end, it's preference. I'm going to use the printr function for the rest of this lecture. Alright, the next set of data we can examine is the database queries executed. To view all the queries executed, we have to modify the wp-config file. Open this file and add a new constant called saveQueries and set it to true. By defining this constant, you're telling WordPress that you would like it to save all SQL queries made by plugins, themes, and the core itself. To view the queries, go back to the index template and add the global variable wpdb. This time, we're going to dump out the property queries from this object. This property will store an array of all the queries made thus far. Save your changes and then refresh the page. If you examine the array of queries, you'll notice a pattern. Each item in the array has the query itself, the time it took to execute the query, and lastly, the files that led up to this query being executed. You should keep in mind that this will only store the queries that have been executed thus far. We added this bit of code at the top of the file. So if any queries are executed after dumping out the contents, then those queries will be added at those times. To prove this, take a look at the number of queries executed. It's around 50. Then I want you to move this bit of code to the very bottom of the template. If you refresh the page, you'll notice the number of queries executed has risen. One of the things I love about this array is that you really get to understand how queries are structured. Throughout most of this course, you use functions to take care of updating and retrieving data from the database. You can take these queries and learn from them. You can even use them in your own code. I want to test out one of these queries. I'm going to copy one of these queries and then I'm going to open up Heidi SQL. With your database selected, you can select this tab called Query and paste in the query inside the text box. Then you can click the Run button, which is this blue arrow, and you'll find the results from the query outputted below. This is so useful for debugging. However, it's kind of messy to constantly make these changes throughout your files. Luckily, there's a tool that will help us examine and debug WordPress. I'm going to remove the code we added. Go to the admin dashboard and navigate to Plugins Add New. I want you to search for the plugin Query Monitor. Install and activate it. After installing it, you'll find a new menu item on top. By clicking on this, you'll be taken to the part of the page where you can view everything executed so far. This plugin will log and display everything executed on any page. If I go to the front end and check this again, you'll see a list of all hooks, queries, scripts, styles, HTTP requests, and so much more. Everything that WordPress does is logged by this plugin and is neatly formatted for you to read. For obvious reasons, you should only use this plugin for development only. This plugin is incredibly useful and I'm sure you would benefit from using it. Before I end this lecture, I want you to check out this link in the resource section of this lecture. The page goes over some tips and tricks for debugging WordPress. Scroll down to the bottom to view some more examples. As you can see, you have the ability to enable logging, which will create a file that you can read to view any errors or warnings that may run behind the scenes. You're also allowed to load the debug versions of certain WordPress core scripts. Lastly, you'll find information about useful debugging WordPress plugins. We won't be going over them, but you're more than free to check them out. The debug bar and logging plugins are incredibly useful and are just as easy to use as the Query Monitor plugin.